Hey, it's Drybear. We did it. We're down to the last weapon. We have covered all 76 weapons that currently exist in the First Descendant, and the last one is the newest one to be added to the game, the Peacemaker. This is a very unique weapon that you can only farm by killing what we call Tony or Gluttony, the most recent Void Intercept Colossus. And it's got a pretty high base for crit scaling. It actually has an insane base for crit scaling. It has a base crit chance of 50% and a base crit damage scaling of 2.5, which puts it in the highest echelon of crit scaling. I would say the biggest downside for this weapon relative to other weapons of its kind is it has a lower side of firearm attack, which means if you can do things like shot focus or Descendants base builds that can raise its firearm attack, you can raise its damage substantially, but the passive is super unique as well, which makes it a very fun weapon to play around with, and it does pair best with characters that have both a dimension skill and can deal skill damage or have a skill that scales with non-attribute skill power. So we have a list for those on the spreadsheet so we can see exactly what those characters are. There's 6 of them in total, and you can use those for that weapon. Now, I messed around with the weapon a bunch, tested it in a bunch of different situations, and ran it with a bunch of different numbers, and my recommendation for this build is actually going to be using the payout mod, which is not a mod we get to use all too often, just because impact rounds tend to be very single focused, so the time frame of being able to spend a lot of rounds in 3 seconds doesn't really fit impact rounds as well as it does with like firing Fiesta, with general rounds, or even with special rounds. Impact weapons are very like big, bursty, sequential shots with not a lot of fire rate, and generally to do firing Fiesta or payout, you want to have a high fire rate so that when you have that short window of time, because it's not rounds based, it's time based, where you get free, you don't expend ammo, you want to have a really high fire rate. However, the cool part is Peacemaker has a passive that allows you to empty all of your rounds at a very high fire rate, and that synergizes perfectly with payout. So the best build here is going to be using that as its basis. And then for the Descendants that best scale with this, you don't have to be one of these Descendants. They're just going to be able to take advantage of the non-attribute skill power scaling that the weapon provides while you have it equipped. Kyle, Enzo, Ajax, Glay, Valby, and Jaber are going to be your 6. You can use it on anyone you want if you wanted to, but it's going to be a nice Descendant increase on that, so you can actually use the passive. But the passive itself does have some nice DPS increase at base with the passive included. So like if we go through a full DPS cycle using your rounds, stacking up your ability charges, and then using the Fan the Hammer passive where you shoot out all of your rounds, the DPS sits at 959k, which is very good, very respectable overall. One of the best weapons in the game for sure. And during the fan burst, if we did a burst calculation, it gets to 1.9 million DPS, which is also very good. It's like shotgun levels of burst, which makes sense because it kind of is like a shotgun for that very short period of time where it's emptying all of its rounds into the target. So the way this works is you will use a dimension skill, and that dimension skill will grant you a buff stack of its passive single reload for peace. At base, it has 100% trigger rate. As you start leveling this up, it will give you additional skill power for non-attribute. It will reduce the reload time modifier down to 0, and you'll still keep some of the recoil. It's like 10%, but it's not not too much, honestly. And during the normal usage of the weapon, it has very high hip fire and ADS accuracy and very low recoil, so it's very easy to use. The recoil really comes into play during the Fan the Hammer moment where you start shooting out the rounds very quickly. When you get to 5 stacks of this, and the skill cost increase does apply while you have the weapon out and while you have the buffs on you, so it will make your skills a little bit more expensive, though usually not enough to worry about for like trying to lower skill cost, except for maybe specific character situations. But then when you get to 5 stacks, you get the buff to activate and makes your weapon glow and gets this really cool cross on it. So a couple characters that are very good at stacking this. Kyle stacks this really well because he has charges on his abilities. I've been using Blair because he also has a dimension ability here where I can do 1, 2, 3, you can stack that up, 4, and then 5, and now you can see that my weapon is glowing. And he's got that like hand over the revolver thing. If you shoot normally during this, nothing happens. So you'll just be able to fire normally. But if you ADS and then fire, it releases all of your ammo at once. So it fires all of that ammo straight out into the target, and then you'll be able to dump it that way, which is incredibly effective for a weapon like this. And like I said, during the burst damage window, you'll be doing a bunch of damage. Then you'll go back to normal, normal use, normal fire. And it does have excellent crit scaling and crit damage, which makes it a very strong weapon for late game gain scaling and for maxing out as well. Now, what works great for this is, unlike things like the strengthen first shot for high power rounds, payout you can trigger without having to reload. So what you do to use payout is that when you land a firearm weak point attack, rounds aren't consumed for 3 seconds. So I think the best way to use this is to stack it up, like use your abilities. If you're using Kyle, dash toward the target and stack it. You can use your dimension skills on Ajax, jump around, stomp around, do your walls, stuff like that. Jayber can deploy things to get that stacked up. And once you have enough stacks and you're ready to go on the Fan the Hammer, what I would do is just make sure that the first shot lands a weak point to trigger payout. So you'll lose 1 round and then the rest of the rounds won't consume anything. And then you just keep shooting during payout. And you should get about 16 to 20 rounds out in a very short period of time until you have to reload. And the reload on this weapon is tiny. It's very, very low. It's a base 1.35 seconds. It's very fast, even for a handgun. So you're able to kind of get that going. So this weapon is best when used with a character that can stack up the passive using a dimension skill with a cooldown that's shorter than 15 seconds. The buff duration is 15 seconds, so you have like a 20-second duration at base. You may want to run like Nimble Fingers or something to get this to stack better. Then once you have the 5, you want to make sure you have payout ready, get the weak point shot, boom, 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 and you can launch a whole bunch of rounds into dealing damage that way. However, if you don't want to do a dimension character or a non-attribute character, this goes down to about 880k DPS. Because it has good crit chance and good crit damage and decent fire rate and a good reload, it's still a good weapon to use. Like if you didn't want to use one of these characters that can stack it or benefit from it, you certainly don't have to. This just goes down a little bit in DPS, and the burst DPS will go down slightly as well because you won't be able to kind of get too much out of it. And you can also run a character that's non-attribute but has dimension if you want to stack it up as well. It's nice to be able to benefit from that 26% non-attribute skill power that you'll get from the weapon while it's out. I think this works great for characters like Kyle or even like Valby because you can stack it up a bunch. It's probably best for Kyle, honestly, or if you wanted to run an Enzo DPS build, shoot some rockets, run some cooldown on that. Ajax could stack a bunch up and then do like a big void explosion, some damage on there. Super nice, super cool, and you can get some extra expending on that. I think there's better options, especially if you're going to do like a Massacre Glay, but Glay can also get this stacked up and use it up, which is super cool, and that gives you that option there. For the weightings, we're going to run with Payout, Action and Reaction, Rifling Reinforcement, and Elemental Enhancement First Weakness. This should come as no surprise at this point. Basically, your best special mod in these 3 mods kind of show up in every build just because they're so good. And then rather than running weak point, we have such great crit scaling that it puts a lot of these crit scalers into focus for us, which is really nice. Better concentration for crit damage, target detection for crit damage, better insight for crit chance, reload focus gives us crit damage, concentrate support ammo gives us crit damage, and fire rate up allows us to get through like our normal usage. Because remember, you're using 5 abilities to stack this up and then release the Fan the Hammer. So unless you're running like a Kyle or like a Blair that can stack up multiple charges very quickly, or you have a very high cooldown build, it's going to be coming very infrequently. Like your average is probably going to be every 15 to 30 seconds you'll be able to Fan the Hammer to do that burst. So unless you're doing some specific tailored build to this weapon, it's not going to come all that often. So we do still want like fire rate up, concentrate support ammo to support that there. Other than these, like I tried running it with weak point, I tried running it with other options. I think crit damage, rounds, fire rate, crit chance is your weight here. Firearm attack is obviously your best because it scales everything that you do. Elemental damage from firearm attack is elemental enhancement as a mod exclusive, and because it scales from firearm attack and firearm attack is your best stat, those weigh together. Crit damage beats out crit chance, beats out fire rate, then rounds, reload, and lastly weak point. And then for re-rolling the stats, your best is going to be bonus first colossi, then crit damage, then flat elemental damage, and then firearm attack, which these 3 are actually pretty close together. Just under firearm attack is going to be crit chance, then rounds, and lastly weak point. So I think your best run here is going to be flat elemental damage, firearm attack, crit damage, and bonus versus colossi to get like the good best 4 rolls. If you get gold rolls of that, that's going to be your best in slot for the build there. As always, this is the build that's down below in the description and the comments. You can use this for reference, and you can swap mods in and out with the weighting that we have here. And we did it. 76 weapons complete. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.